Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The shocking revelation that Kane Ashby might be Jill Abbott's biological son has left Genoa City spinning in disbelief. And when the truth finally came crashing down, Jill's entire world changed in an instant. It began as an ordinary day at Chancellor Winters, with Jill handling business calls from her London office, her usual sharpness and charm fully intact. But then came the call that shattered her composure. A mysterious attorney from Australia reached out, claiming to have new information about Kane's past, information that would turn Jill's life inside out. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was just another scam or one of the many rumors that often floated around about Kane's identity. After all, Kane's background had been questioned before, his secrets and lies tearing families apart and then stitching them back together. But this time, something in the man's tone stopped her cold. He mentioned her own name, Jill Foster Abbott, connected to Kane's birth records, a connection she had never imagined possible. Jill's heart raced as she hung up the phone, her hands trembling. Decades of secrets, regrets, and long-buried pain began to resurface. She had been through so many ups and downs. Losing Catherine, discovering she wasn't really a chancellor by blood, watching her family crumble and rebuild, and now this? The idea that Kane, a man she had once treated as both an outsider and a son-in-law, could actually be her biological son was too overwhelming to process. She booked a flight back to Genoa City immediately, unable to sit still for another moment. When she landed, her mind was in chaos. Memories of Kane flashed before her eyes. His loyalty, his lies, his kindness, his mistakes, all seen through a new lens that made her heart ache with confusion. Meanwhile, Kane was at the athletic club, nursing a drink, lost in thought about his own past. Ever since Lily had moved on, his life had felt hollow, and he'd been trying to rebuild himself. But something had been gnawing at him, a sense that there was more to his story, something he hadn't been told. So when Jill walked into the club with that haunted look on her face, Kane knew something big was about to go down. "Jill?" he asked, standing, his tone cautious. "What's wrong?" She stared at him, her eyes filled with tears that she couldn't blink away. "I need to talk to you, Kane. And it's about your family. And mine." They sat in a quiet corner of the lounge, and Jill could barely get the words out. She handed him a folder, the same one she had been clutching since she landed. Inside were documents, DNA results, and a birth certificate from Australia. "These were sent to me," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was another one of those mistakes, another cruel twist of fate. But Kane, this says you're my son." Kane's eyes widened, his breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. He shook his head in disbelief. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My mother was Hilary Ashby. She died when I was a teenager. She couldn't have been lying about that." But Jill's tears fell faster now. "I didn't believe it either. But I had the DNA retested in Genoa City. Kane, it came back positive." Kane stood up, pacing, his mind spinning. Everything he thought he knew about himself was unraveling. No, that can't be right," he said, his voice rising with panic. "You're saying I've been living a lie my whole life? That everything I knew about my family isn't real?" Jill tried to reach for him, but he pulled back. The pain in his eyes was raw. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he shouted. Jill's voice cracked as she pleaded. "Kane, listen to me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I was told years ago that the baby I gave birth to died. I was young, scared, and my mother handled everything. I never saw the body. I just believed what they told me." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the truth poured out of her. Kane froze, the weight of her confession hitting him like a tidal wave. Billy Abbott entered the club just in time to see his mother crying and Kane standing there looking shattered. He rushed over, immediately defensive. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Jill turned to face him, her eyes red and swollen. "Billy, I need you to sit down. Please." Billy frowned, his stomach tightening. "You're scaring me, Mom. What happened?" She hesitated, glancing between her two sons, one she had raised and one she never knew she had. "Billy," she said softly, "Kane is your brother." Billy's jaw dropped, his face draining of color. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't be serious. But when he saw the documents on the table, the DNA results, the birth records, all pointing to Jill as Kane's biological mother, he knew it wasn't a joke. The silence that followed was unbearable. Billy's mind reeled. Kane? The same man who had once been married to Lily, who had worked beside him, who had been both ally and rival. His brother? He felt sick. This is insane, he muttered, stepping back. This changes everything. Kane tried to speak, but Billy cut him off. You lied to us before, Kane. You've lied about who you are, where you came from. How do we even know this isn't another scam? Kane's anger flared. You think I wanted this? He snapped. You think I asked for this to happen? I just found out I might be her son, Billy. I'm as shocked as you are. Jill sobbed harder, her voice breaking. He's not lying. I had the tests done myself. It's true. Billy couldn't handle it. He stormed out of the club, slamming the door behind him, his emotions a mix of betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak. He'd always been protective of Jill, always thought of himself as her anchor. Now suddenly he had to share that bond with Kane. A man he never trusted, a man whose very presence now felt like a violation. Jill called after him, but he was gone. She collapsed into a chair, completely undone. Kane, despite his own shock, moved to comfort her. I don't know what to say, he murmured. I don't even know how to feel. Jill looked up at him through her tears. You don't have to say anything, Kane. Just let me hold you. Please. He hesitated, but then, slowly, he let her embrace him. For the first time in years, Jill felt like a missing piece of her heart had returned. The next few days in Genoa City were nothing short of emotional chaos. Word spread fast. Jill Abbott, the woman who had weathered every scandal imaginable, had discovered she had another son. The news sent shockwaves through the Chancellor and Abbott families alike. Catherine's portrait in the Chancellor mansion seemed almost to mock Jill as she stood beneath it, talking to her old friend's memory. You always said life would surprise me, Catherine, she whispered. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined. She thought about how Catherine would have teased her, called her a fool, but also reminded her to embrace the chance for love, no matter how unexpected. Kane, meanwhile, was struggling to process the revelation. He sat alone in Chancellor Park, staring at the pond where he used to bring Lily and the twins. His entire identity was crumbling, but part of him couldn't help feeling a strange sense of belonging. He had always felt a connection to Jill, an inexplicable pull, and now he understood why. But what about Billy? Could they ever coexist as brothers? The tension between them had always been volatile, but now it was personal. Kane didn't want to replace anyone. He just wanted to understand where he fit. When Billy finally returned to the mansion, his anger had softened into sorrow. Jill tried to explain again, but he cut her off, his voice breaking. You always told me I was your miracle baby, he said. And now I find out I've got a brother I didn't even know existed? You kept so many secrets, Mom. And now it's tearing us apart. Jill reached for his hand. I didn't know, Billy. I swear to you I didn't know. But this is a chance for all of us, to heal, to start fresh. Billy shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. I don't know if I can do that. Not yet. He turned to Kane, his tone softer but still wary. If you really are my brother, then we're going to have to find a way to deal with that. But don't expect me to call you family overnight. Kane nodded. I don't expect anything. I just want the truth. Days turned into weeks and slowly, the emotional storm began to settle. Jill made it her mission to learn everything about Kane's past, the childhood he lost, the life he built, the pain he carried. Every conversation they shared brought them a little closer. She saw so much of herself in him, the stubbornness, the resilience, the fierce loyalty. You're my son, she told him one afternoon, tears shining in her eyes. And I don't care what anyone says. That's not just a piece of paper. It's in our blood. Kane smiled faintly, still overwhelmed, but for the first time in years he felt like he belonged somewhere again. Billy, on the other hand, was still struggling. Watching Kane and Jill grow closer stirred something dark inside him, a jealousy he couldn't quite admit. He'd always had to share his mother's attention, first with Catherine, then with Colin's schemes, and now with Kane. It felt like history repeating itself. One night he confronted Jill. "You're replacing me," he said bitterly. "I can see it. You've always wanted a son like Cain. Charming, confident, perfect in everyone's eyes." Jill gasped. "Billy, that's not true. You're my son. You'll always be my son." But Billy's heart was too bruised to believe it. He left before she could stop him, leaving Jill sobbing once again, wondering how a truth meant to bring her family together had instead torn it apart. Cain found Billy later at Crimson Lights, staring into a cup of cold coffee. He sat across from him, silent for a long time. Finally he said, "I didn't ask for any of this, Billy. I don't want to take your place. I just want to know where I belong." Billy didn't look up right away. "You can't just walk into my life and expect everything to be okay," he said quietly. "It's not that simple." Cain nodded. "I know, but we've both made mistakes. Maybe this is a chance to stop fighting and start healing. For her sake." That broke something in Billy. He looked at Cain, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw the pain, not manipulation, not deceit, but genuine hurt. He sighed. "You're right. For her sake." They shared a silent moment of understanding, fragile but real. Weeks later, Jill stood in the Chancellor Garden, surrounded by her two sons. She took each of their hands and whispered, "I've made so many mistakes in my life. But finding out the truth about you, Cain, it's given me hope again. And Billy, you're my heart. Both of you are my boys. That's all that matters." Billy smiled faintly, and Cain squeezed her hand. For the first time in a long time, Jill felt peace. It hadn't been easy, and it wouldn't be from here on out, but for once, the family she thought she lost was finally coming together, one broken piece at a time. But in true Genoa City fashion, peace never lasts long. As Jill celebrated this newfound family bond, a new shadow loomed on the horizon. Someone from Cain's past, an old contact from Australia, was arriving in town with a warning. Not everything about Cain's origins had been revealed. And as Jill wiped away her last tears of joy, she had no idea that the next revelation might destroy everything she had just fought to rebuild. The office was never truly silent, not with the faint, perpetual hum of the climate control and the distant, muffled sounds of the city 15 stories below, but in that moment it became a vacuum. All sound, all breath, all the spinning gears of the world seemed to halt. For Jill, the meticulously arranged space, the gleaming mahogany desk, the framed accolades, the tasteful impersonal art, suddenly lost all substance, becoming a mere painted backdrop against which a single devastating truth was being unveiled. The words hung in the air, not as sounds but as physical entities, each one a hammer blow against the fragile architecture of her life. Cain was her biological son. They were impossible words, a ludicrous, cruel joke spun from some dark, unimaginable malice. Yet the look on Billy's face, a harrowing mixture of pity, anguish, and a desperate need for her to understand, told her this was no fiction. This was a verdict. This was the ground giving way. Her mind, that sharp, strategic instrument that had built empires and outmaneuvered rivals, recoiled. It was a denial so profound it was almost physiological. Her body went cold, a wave of ice washing through her veins, followed immediately by a scorching flush of heat that crept up her neck and bloomed across her cheeks. Her fingers, which had been resting lightly on the cool surface of her desk, began to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable vibration that traveled up her arms and settled deep within her core. This couldn't be. It was a logical fallacy, a tear in the fabric of reality. Cain Ashby? The man who had been a fixture, a complication, a source of endless frustration and rivalry for years. The man who had married her own granddaughter, for whom she had felt a potent, simmering cocktail of resentment and disdain. He was an obstacle, a pretender, a charming usurper. He could not be hers. The denial was a fortress, but the memories were the siege engines crashing against its walls. They came not in a flood, but in sharp staccato bursts, each one a piece of evidence in a case she had never known was being tried. The loss of her first child, the tiny, heartbreaking void that had been carved into her soul so long ago. A pain she had learned to compartmentalize, to bury under layers of ambition and survival. She had been told the baby died. It was a closed chapter, a wound that had scarred over ugly and thick. But now that scar was being ripped open, and the phantom pain was more acute than the original injury. She thought of the time she had clashed with Cain, the inexplicable intensity of their conflicts, the way their arguments had always felt personal, rooted in something deeper than business or family loyalty. There was a raw, exposed nerve that seemed to connect them, a connection she had mistaken for pure, unadulterated animosity. Now she saw it for what it was, the twisted, invisible cord that binds a mother to a child, screaming in protest at the unnatural distance between them. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on a point somewhere beyond Billy, seeing not the present but a horrifying reel of the past. She saw Kane's face, not the face of the corporate adversary but the man beneath, the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes, the particular curve of his smile that had always, inexplicably, tugged at a forgotten corner of her heart. Traits she had never consciously acknowledged now screamed their truth. There was a ghost of herself in him, a faint echo of features she saw in her own mirror, and worse, a haunting shadow of his father, a man from a lifetime ago. How had she not seen it? The question was a torment. The signs had been there, whispering to her in a language she did not understand, and she had dismissed everyone, blinded by the narrative she had constructed, by the lies she had been fed. And then came the anger, a white-hot geyser erupting through the cracks in her shock. It was a righteous, blinding fury that sought a target. Who had done this? Who had stolen her child, her flesh and blood, and given him a life in the same city, in her very orbit, while letting her believe he was gone forever? The betrayal was so vast, so incomprehensibly cruel, that it stole her breath. It was a theft of decades, of first steps and scraped knees, of graduations and heartbreaks, of all the mundane and monumental moments that form the bond between a mother and her son. They had been robbed. Both of them. Kane had been raised with a different story, a different identity, and she had been left with a ghost. The injustice of it was a physical weight on her chest, crushing, suffocating. Her gaze shifted back to Billy, who was still speaking, his voice a low, frantic murmur she could no longer decipher. He was the messenger, and in that moment, he bore the brunt of her spiraling rage. He was part of this. He had known. He had held this cataclysm in his hands, and now he was delivering it to her, shattering her world with his calm, devastating explanation. The love she felt for him, her Billy, twisted into something sharp and painful. How could he stand there and tell her this? How could he be the one to dismantle her entire existence? The look on his face, that pained, broken expression from the spoilers Billy had mentioned, was not enough to quell the storm. It was a confirmation of the chaos, a reflection of the shards her life had become. The anger crested and broke, and what rushed in to take its place was a grief so profound, so annihilating that it had no sound. It was the void left after the explosion. Her shoulders, which had been rigid with tension, slumped. The strength that defined Jill Foster Abbott, that had been her trademark through loss, betrayal, and countless corporate wars, simply evaporated. It was as if every memory, every interaction, every bitter word exchanged with Kane was being replayed on a loop, but now with a new horrifying audio track. Every time she had dismissed him, every time she had plotted against him, every time she had looked at him with contempt, it was all a rejection of her own child. The weight of that was immeasurable. It was a sin for which there was no absolution. And then the dam holding back a lifetime of suppressed emotion finally irrevocably shattered. It started not as a sob, but as a sharp, involuntary gasp, a desperate, ragged intake of air that seemed to have no exit. Her hand flew to her mouth, as if to physically hold the pain inside, but it was useless. A tremor racked her frame, and then the tears came. They were not delicate, ladle-like tears, but a torrential, ugly, unrestrained flood. They were tears of 50 years of buried mourning for a baby she never got to hold. They were tears of incalculable rage at the deception that had defined both their lives. They were tears of shame for every harsh thought and every cruel word she had ever directed at the son she never knew she had. She wept for the little boy with Kane's eyes who had learned to ride a bike without her. She wept for the teenager who had navigated heartache, and she hadn't been there to offer advice or a shoulder. She wept for the man he had become, a man she had fought with such venom, a man who had stood across from her at boardroom tables and family gatherings, a stranger wearing the face of her blood. The sobs tore through her, deep guttural sounds that seemed to be ripped from a place she didn't know existed. She collapsed forward, her body folding over her desk, her forehead pressing against the cold, hard wood. The carefully applied makeup streaked down her face in messy black trails, but vanity was a concept from another lifetime. This was a primal wound, and it demanded a primal response. In the midst of the storm, a new terrifying thought emerged, a fresh wave of anguish. Lily. Her beautiful, fierce granddaughter. Lily was married to Cain. She had built a life with him, had children with him. The family tree, already a gnarled and tangled thing in Genoa City, had now twisted in on itself in a grotesque, unimaginable knot. The implications were a nightmare. The scandal, the confusion, the sheer, shocking taboo of it all threatened to swallow her whole. How could she ever face Lily? How could she explain? How could any of them navigate the wreckage of this truth? The foundations of their entire family structure had not just cracked, they had been vaporized. Billy was at her side then, his own face streaked with tears, his hands hovering, unsure whether to touch her, to offer comfort that could not possibly be accepted. His presence was a reminder of the world outside this personal apocalypse, a world that would have to be faced, a truth that would have to be navigated. But for now there was only this room, this pain, this seismic shift in the very bedrock of her identity. She was no longer just Jill Foster Abbott, cosmetics tycoon, matriarch, formidable force of nature. She was a mother who had unknowingly rejected her son for years. She was a woman whose entire history was a lie. The tears were a baptism into this new horrifying reality, a reality where the man she had called her enemy was the living, breathing embodiment of her greatest loss, and now her most complicated, heartbreaking second chance. The weeping would eventually subside, the practicalities would eventually have to be addressed, but the woman sobbing over her desk was gone, and who would emerge in her place was a question too terrifying to contemplate. The truth had set her free, but it was a freedom that felt exactly like a life sentence.